All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. Today's guest is Chantal Desloges. She is an immigration lawyer and senior partner at her own practice, and she is certified by the Law Society as a specialist in both citizenship and immigration and refugee law. Her practice focuses on Canadian citizenship, family sponsorship, temporary resident, refugee cases. I mean, pretty much the whole gamut there in immigration law. So thank you so much, Chantal, for joining us here today.
Thank you for asking me.
And first of all, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about your background, and there's a lot leading up to starting your own practice and being so successful in immigration. But maybe you could tell us about what led you into immigration law and maybe just law in general to start with.
Sure. Yeah. I often tell people that I didn't get into immigration law, it got into me. I come from a small town. The town that I grew up in at that time barely had any people of color. I think I met maybe a handful of immigrants in my life before I moved to go to school in Toronto. I knew from the time I was a very small child that I wanted to be a lawyer. I think it's possible my parents brainwashed me, maybe played subliminal messages while I was sleeping in my crib. But I knew from the time I was 5 that I wanted to be a lawyer. But I come from a working class family, didn't have any lawyers or anybody in the legal profession whatsoever in our family. And I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but I had no idea what that meant. So I moved to Toronto, settled in, eventually applied to law school, was admitted at Osgoode Hall. And in my first year, I very quickly realized that most of my classmates came from families that were very well connected. Their fathers or their relatives were judges, lawyers, that kind of thing. And I thought, if I'm going to be competitive, I have to do something to up my game here if I want to be able to get a job after law school, because I don't have these connections that other people had. So I decided to get some practice. So I went down to the legal clinic. They have a clinic at Osgoode Hall Law School where you can volunteer, that low-income people who can't afford a lawyer can be represented by a student lawyer who is supervised by a licensed lawyer. So I thought, well, I'll do that. So I walked down to the legal clinic, and that was back in the days before we really used laptops or anything like that. They had pieces of paper stuck on the wall with tape, and they had names of things like criminal law, civil law, family law, and you could just literally take out a pen and sign your name wherever you wanted to volunteer. And all of the lists, except for one, had a ton of volunteers. And there was one that had barely any volunteers, and that was immigration. And I looked at that and I thought, well, it looks like they could use some help. And that eventually became the theme of my life. It looks like they could use some help. And so I wrote my name down there, and I got my first case. That was 1994, a woman from Jamaica, first name Lillian. And won that case and loved this woman. She really changed the way that I saw everything. She needed help so badly. And it was such a good feeling to win that it was addictive, actually. I thought, I want to spend the rest of my life doing exactly this. And now it's like, 2021, and she still keeps in touch. She still calls me at least once a year, usually around Christmas time, to let me know how she's doing. So having that practice over the next few years of law school put me in a good position when I looked for an articling job that I already knew what I was doing basically in immigration. So I articled at the law firm of Green and Spiegel, became an associate there, became a partner there. And after a few years of partnership, I started to think about, okay, well, what's going to be my legacy? What's going to be my long-term vision? And I wanted to set up my own firm because I like to do business differently. I care about people a lot, not only the clients, but the staff. So I thought to myself, I want to be able to do this my own way and, not, be so much obsessed with the bottom line, but really be more focused on relationships and people. So that's what made me start my own law firm in 2010. And because, I was a pretty well-established immigration lawyer by then already. So it wasn't so difficult as it would be if I was really young and just starting out. I think I started with probably almost 800 clients. So I hit the ground running. And since then, it's just been, growing, building, solidifying my team, surrounding myself with people that have the same attitude that care, that are relational in nature, excellent at what they do, but with a lot of sincerity in the heart as well. So that brings us up till today. A few years ago, I got an opportunity to write a book with Eamon Publishing. I co-authored immigration law textbook, which is now in its third edition. I've taught quite a bit over the years at various institutions, and I'm right now teaching at Queen's University Law School, the new immigration program that has launched for consulting, people interested in getting into consulting, that sort of thing. Yeah, so sorry, that's a very long-winded explanation, but
Oh, perfect. That's a great background there, and maybe we can look at so you practice and worked your way to being a partner. You go 10 years or so, and then now you've had about 10 plus years running your own practices. What can you compare from those two experiences in immigration law, and what can you share maybe I mean, certainly you had a unique perspective because you, as you mentioned, you hit the ground running, so you didn't have maybe that initial growing pains that a lot of people take in setting up their own practice. But what can you compare from those two experiences?
well, what I can tell you is that the skill set you need to be a good immigration worker is completely different than the skill set you need to run a business. So just because you're actually good at file work, or you're excellent at doing refugee hearings, or whatever, that doesn't necessarily translate into being able to operate your own business successfully. You need to either have the type of personality that pays attention to, you're okay dealing with stuff like HR and bookkeeping and managing people, which is like herding cats a lot of the time. I mean, that's probably the most difficult part. And also business development, right? Where are you going to get your clients from? Those are all things that you have to worry about at the same time as doing all the other stuff that you've been really good at doing. So I think that for people, starting in the profession generally, you'd have to really ask yourself, like, am I more of a person that likes to actually execute the project? Somebody else gives me the file, I work on it, I do the work. Or do I have this other skill set that allows me to actually build a business? And I would encourage, anyone who's thinking of hanging up their own shingle or maybe going into a partnership or something, I really encourage you to take some business training. How to do budgets, and how to read financial statements, and basic labor laws and business development, like how to network properly. Those are all, like, I was lucky enough that, when I opened my firm, I didn't know any of that stuff, and I could have failed miserably. I probably should have failed miserably, but I was somehow able to pick it up as I went, and made a lot of mistakes along the way. But I was able to teach myself. But if I could go back and do it all over again, I would definitely take some kind of a business course before trying to set up my own business. There's a really good book that I read that I highly recommend for anyone thinking of starting up on their own, a book called The E-Myth. And I can't remember who the author is, but he talks a lot about making this transition to being a worker bee to being the queen bee, and how different it is.
Yeah, I think one of the things shared by a number of guests is that you don't learn that in law school, sort of that practical business side. We're learning all about the theory, about the practice, but not sort of those little nuts and bolts there that often comes with the experience.
Yeah, they don't teach you any of that. And in fact, I used to always joke, particularly when I used to go to the IRB a lot. Well, I still go there a lot, but in the early days, I used to say, like, they literally should have a course in school that just teaches you how to wait. Because, like, so much of your day, like when you do any kind of litigation, whether it's tribunal or court or whatever, like half of it is sitting around waiting and trying to figure out what to do with yourself when you're just waiting and waiting and waiting, and how to be productive during that time and not go crazy.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned waiting now, because so how is the IRB been running since COVID? Are you able to be more productive waiting, being perhaps virtual at home or at the office, compared to being at the board itself? Those rooms are pretty small. when, especially when you can't have that many people watching, right? From my experience there, that it's hard to maybe do anything else if you're sitting there waiting
Yeah.
for the hearing to start. So how can you maybe share with my students what the procedures are like now with COVID, and compare them to what they were like before?
Sure. Yeah. So they're hardly having any in-person hearings at all right now. So whereas before they would give you a date and time and you would have to bundle up your big file and make sure your clients were organized and get yourself over to the board, check in at the front desk and go into a room. And then you're in that room basically for at least half a day, sometimes a full day. Now they're using Microsoft Teams software to do online hearings. And there was a lot of trepidation about it amongst practitioners and a lot of mixed views on how that's going. I love it. I love the fact that, there's nobody, running late because they couldn't find parking or the interpreter got stuck on the subway or whatever. Like everybody shows up exactly on time. You can see everybody's face really clearly and everyone at the same time, which is fabulous because credibility is so much of the assessment, right? Like I can look at my client really closely and I can see what they're thinking or tell if they're getting into trouble or gauge them, and the member is doing the same thing, right? And I can also see the other people. I can see the minister's council, their facial expression. I can see the board members' facial expression, and I'm in the comfort of my own space. So, I didn't have to pick up a 20-pound file and lug it all the way over to the board. I can spread myself, out on the desk or my dining room table for that matter, and be comfortable. I mean, I was just talking to a minister's council today. We had a hearing together this afternoon, and afterwards we sent each other a few emails, and I was joking with her and I said, geez, I love these online hearings and I hope they continue them. And she said, yeah, she said, you remember the rooms are always so cold and you'd be freezing. You have to, especially women, like a lot of us are often very cold. So you bring extra sweaters and, you'd have to think ahead to, bring snacks and your own drinks and stuff, and then you were stuck there the whole day. And God forbid you forgot anything or, during a break here, you could just literally stand up and walk to your fridge and get yourself a Coke Zero and enjoy that on your own time. I love it. But some lawyers are a little concerned about how, because not all of our clients are necessarily very sophisticated, right? Sometimes you have clients who are illiterate or maybe elderly, not very much used to working with computers. And intimidated by the process. I had a client like that not too long ago that I actually brought her over to my home so that we could sit together. I sat in a different room and I had to keep running back and forth to set up her technical stuff because she didn't know how to use the software. Or people that it just, sometimes the video, it's so impersonal sometimes, right? And you can't like pass each other pieces of paper. Like if you say, oh, you know what, I forgot to file this exhibit. Oh my goodness. Like, will you accept it as a late disclosure? You could just hand it to them if you're there. You can't do that when you're online. I mean, I would say that the board has made it, at least it's starting to now make a pretty good transition to doing remote hearings. But at the beginning, it was really tough. Like for the first, I would say 6 months, it was a bit of a rough go and things are really slow. Like I had to tell my clients, you need to abandon all the expectations, whatever you had in your mind as to how long anything is going to take. It's all taking a really long time right now.
I think it's unique because I know a lot of the criminal defense lawyers that come there, they get a mixed bag. Some think about credibility issues on a remote hearing, but at least with spousal sponsorships, you would always potentially have someone calling in from overseas on an appeal. So in this way, at least you're able to visualize because you've always been practicing with the sense that there's potentially someone that you're just hearing from that you don't know where they are, and assessing credibility when you hear a voice in one of those conference rooms. I can't imagine how well the connections were even throughout your practice. So is that changed anything with your preparation with it now being on Microsoft Teams versus sort of one person in the room and one person overseas, or sometimes no one in the room except you and Minister's Council?
Yeah. The only thing it's changed in terms of my preparation is just to get clients ready for what kind of a different experience it is, as opposed to actually sitting in the room with somebody or just being on a phone when nobody can see you, right? Because when you're on the phone, sometimes like you have that little bit of anonymity that it's not quite so threatening, as someone having a full visual of your face. So I wouldn't say the advice that I give people is that different other than the technical aspect, but I really enjoy being able to connect the witness by video. I think it's altogether better as long as you don't have connectivity issues. I mean, I remember in the early days, like even before COVID, the Immigration Appeal Division had started to allow the use of Skype to do like video link with your witness. And there was like an uprising in Iran, and we had a really hard time being able to get stable internet with the witness, right? But I mean, that can happen with the phone too. I mean, even when you've got somebody on a regular phone, you can still have problems where the call's dropping. I just think it's always better to have that visual. Especially when you're assessing credibility. I mean, I think it's hard to do that without seeing somebody.
Another thing with respect to waiting, and I think certainly it's been lengthened probably with COVID, is there's a lengthy process that you must be going with your clients when they come to you. They fill out the application forms, and then they're waiting, right? And hopefully in their case, it's just dealing with the application, not going through the board or anything like that. But what advice do you have for students or maybe newly licensed practitioners about how to keep the dialogue open with your clients and maintaining? I mean, you're mentioning 800 plus clients, but how do you find that balance where they want to be in the loop, but they're not calling every day asking, Chantal, what's going on with my application? Especially because that's one of the largest areas of concern for the Law Society, that clients don't get that proper communication,
Yeah.
and then they go to the Law Society with a complaint. So what advice can you have from your many years of experience with managing client expectations?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because you're right that the number one source of complaints to the Law Society has nothing to do with your competence, but a lot to do with communication. And immigration is a really interesting field in that regard, because number one, you're dealing cross-culturally. So you're dealing with people that are from cultures that may be quite dissimilar from your own, that may have different expectations in terms of the amount and frequency of communication, may have different perceptions of professional boundaries. It's not uncommon for me to get emails from clients in the middle of the night, and then they're upset that I haven't answered them by 6 o'clock in the morning. So there's the cross-cultural piece. There's also the piece that it almost doesn't matter what the person is applying for. They're at a point in their life where they're super stressed out and the stakes are high. Okay, so even if it's a business immigration case where you've got somebody with a lot of money who wants to come here and set up a business, okay, they're not a refugee. Nobody's going to die if this doesn't work out, but it's important to them. So because they're stressed out, they can often be a little bit unreasonable, a little bit demanding, and sometimes very needy, right? Like talking to you makes them feel better, right? But you're not their psychologist, you're not their counselor, you're their legal representative. So I think some important advice would be you need to manage those expectations very early in the relationship. So my retainer agreement says right in it, we will follow up with immigration at the intervals that we deem are professionally appropriate. Not every time you ask us to, but when we think it's professionally appropriate to do so. Because some people, they would want you to email immigration every single day. And do you know how fast that would get you blacklisted, right? Nobody would answer you after that. So you got to manage their expectations. One thing that I do quite often, particularly with files that I know are going to take a long time, or they may be quite tricky or labor intensive, I charge by the hour. So, if you want to call me 100 times, that's fine, but all you're doing is driving up your own expense. The other thing that I often do on a practical level is if I do work out a block fee, I put an hourly cap on it. So I say, okay, it's going to be $5,000, but if it goes more than X number of hours, and I do the math in my head, like how many hours is reasonable, then if it goes past that, I'm going to charge you more. Right. And then you give them a running tally as you go. It's like, okay, like, you're at 10 hours now, you're at 15 hours now, that sort of thing. But I think also, just purely on a practical note, most people are okay if you like, they just need to know that you got their message, right? They don't necessarily expect you to give them a whole substantive response right away, but they do like to know that you got their message. So, using an autoresponder on your email that shoots back a message immediately and says, "Thank you, your message is received. Our standard response time frame for a business email is 2 business days." And then they say, "Okay, it's Monday, so I shouldn't expect to hear from them probably until Wednesday or Thursday." But they know you got the email. Ignoring people will only make it worse, because now one email turns into 10 emails because you haven't answered the first one. I subscribe to this policy of do it now. Okay. If there's something worth doing, don't triple handle that task. Like if there's a phone call you have to make, or if there's an email that you have to send, instead of looking at your inbox 10 times and thinking, "Oh, I don't feel like doing it right now," just the minute you open it, deal with it immediately. And if you're not able for some reason to do it right away, put it in your calendar for tomorrow or the next day to remind yourself and to block off time to do it then. But don't just leave it to sit there. That's the worst thing you can do. And then, people get pretty amped up if they don't feel that they're heard. And I mean, there's also nothing wrong with drawing boundaries. And I've done that with clients before, like where they're really just too much. And I have to say, like, I say it to them straightforward. I'm like, "Look, I'm going to be really brutally honest with you here. You are driving me nuts. This is not helpful," right? Like all you're doing is you're transferring your panic onto me, and I'm the one that needs to be objective and to represent you. That this is not helping your case. This is actually making it worse. And it's, at the end of the day, increasing your legal bill. So back off, right? People tend to respect that.
Now, is it, I mean, maybe to build on that, once the forms, let's say, have been submitted, let's say you're doing a spousal sponsorship or a family sponsorship, is that generally the end of the sort of substantive work until you get a decision from citizenship, immigration, refugee citizenship Canada, or what kind of happens in the sort of intermediate period between the initial sending of the documents and then the final decision?
Mm-hmm. So it depends on how the officer reacts to the application in many cases. But typically when we send in an application, let's just suppose it's a sponsorship. Okay, we send it out. We know that probably we should be hearing something within X number of months, because that's what usually happens. So I mark it down in my calendar, follow up that file. If you haven't heard anything after 3 months, make sure you follow it up. And then I never have a file that's in my drawer that doesn't have something marked down. When is the next time I'm going to pull out that file and look at it? Because early in your career, when you're not as busy, you might think to yourself, "Oh, I'll just remember." You won't. You'll get up to a point where you're so busy, you've got a lot of things on the go, or maybe you're going through something personal, you're going to forget. So mark that file for follow-up. So, if everything goes really smoothly, it'll just be like, you'll get the odd piece of correspondence, you make sure the client understands what's going on, you'll do the odd follow-up, and then it'll go through to completion. But, a lot of wrong things can also happen. If the officer has doubts based on the written application, they may call your client for an interview. Now you're going to have to sit down and prepare your client for that interview. Like, what's the legal test? What is the officer looking for? Is there anything in your application which does maybe look a little bit suspicious? That you have to be sure that you're able to explain it to the officer. You get them ready. Sometimes an issue of inadmissibility may come up. Maybe somebody fails a medical test, or a criminal conviction comes up that you didn't know about, or they accuse your client of lying about something and they send you a letter asking for you to continue to participate. So, I mean, the amount of work and time involved, if it goes this way versus this way, can be radically different. And that's why it's really important in your retainer agreement to mark it very clearly what exactly you're doing. And anything extra over that, you will be charging them extra fees. You don't want to get stuck in a block fee arrangement where something super complicated happens and it takes you 3 times the number of hours. That's not fair to you. It's also, by the way, not fair to the client, because the moment you start to feel resentful about the amount of time you're spending on a file versus how much you've charged the client, you're not good. Even though you try your best and you may be extremely ethical, you start to feel resentful. It's going to tempt you not to do your level best. So charge a fair price for the work that you're doing. Don't sell yourself short. Trust that your level of competence is worth something, and make sure you get paid enough that when you look at that file, you feel glad to pick it up and do an extra hour of work on it, instead of pushing it off to the side because you're upset that your profit margin hasn't gone very well.
So how can, students, when they become practitioners, how can they ensure that they're meeting those deadlines? What's a good way to remind yourself that, hey, 6 months from now I got to follow up, or 9 months from now I got to follow up?
Mm-hmm. I'm a real calendar person. I use Microsoft Outlook calendar, but I mean, maybe you use Google Calendar or whatever software you have, use it and look at it constantly. So my calendar, I even color code it. So I write reminders to myself because I have a staff. Every deadline is copied to 2 people. So if one person misses it, there's a backup. So there's another person, ideally as a backup, that would notice it. Oh, by the way, I noticed that you're supposed to follow up so-and-so today. Did you do that? Right? So definitely write it down and do it the same way every time. Because if you have a number of different ways of doing things, you're going to become confused very easily. I have a system in my calendar where all of the entries are marked, like the standard background for Microsoft Outlook is blue. So every single task or appointment is marked in blue. If I complete it successfully, I change the color to green. So all of my staff, when they go and look at my calendar, they'll know that I did it. If I didn't get to it, I'll mark it red. And if someone goes in there later and sees that it's not marked at all, it's neither green nor red, they may worry that I haven't seen it and then follow up with me to make sure that it's been done. So just like set a reminder system for yourself, make sure it's written down. Do not trust yourself to remember. Believe me, you will not. And my other advice about that would be, as soon as you find, handle that task right away when it comes to your mind. Okay, so the minute you get a letter from immigration saying that you have to respond within 30 days, don't move that letter somewhere else. Sit down right now and put it in your calendar for 30 days, because you're going to shove it over to the corner of your desk and you will forget. And it happens. It happened to me once. I had a nightmare situation where I actually don't know what happened. I think there was some confusion between what the client was doing on his own and what I was supposed to do. I missed a deadline for sending some documents on a work permit application, and it got rejected. And the client was a pretty high net worth person, and was not happy at all, yelling, threatening to sue. I had to call professional insurance and report it to them. And then it became even more complicated because now I can't even just answer the client's emails. I have to run it by the law pro counsel all the time instead, right? So thank God it worked out, because I managed to get the application reconsidered and it was approved, but it was terrible. And I also remember my assistant was on holidays at that time too. So normally she would have written it in the calendar, and everything conspired to make sure that, if any of those things had not gone wrong, it wouldn't have been missed. But everything did go wrong and I did miss it. So it's a good real life example, like missing deadlines accidentally or making a mistake. It happens to, really good senior people as much as it can happen to you. So don't think that you're immune from it. Just cover yourself, make sure.
Now, one of the things you were talking to us about before is that you're starting to work in Queens, and now there's a new immigration consulting program to your university program, to my understanding, from only offered at Queens and in English, and I believe Sherbrooke, maybe in French. Can you maybe tell us a bit about the program, or what you're teaching there, and how do you think that's going to improve sort of the people coming out of the program and after a 2-year program, as opposed to, I think, as little as 6 months and previously?
Yeah, it's a 2 semester program offered over like 2 academic semesters. So it just started in January, so it'll go until the spring, and then the summer will be off, and then there will be one more semester next year. So it's not really 2 years, although it does cross over it does cross over the year. So the program is really interesting. I was very involved in the curriculum development for the program. It's very intensive. It is a full-time program, meaning you could expect to spend a good 20 hours a week only on this. The same as if you were going to classes of full-time at a university. The entrance requirements are fairly strict. Like the English test, I think you have to get at least a 7 on the IELTS. I think it's a 7, but I'm talking off the top of my head, so don't quote me. But you have to pass an English test, and you have to have a degree. So because it's a postgraduate program, so a BA is a requirement. It can be from a foreign university. It doesn't have to be a Canadian university, but you do need a degree before you can take it. We're really focusing hard. When the program was being developed, a lot of the feedback that they were getting was about gaps in training, like from students who had studied, other programs, and like where were the pieces missing, and the most common complaints against consultants, where are they coming from, right? So they identified, that there was a gap in training about litigation, being in front of a tribunal, training about that, training on how to read case law, right? Because immigration, after all, is a legal field, and you have to know what the courts have interpreted those laws to mean. If you don't know that, you're never going to be able to do a proper job. So, but the problem is these, not having been to law school, how could you expect people to just understand that? I mean, that's as a lawyer in our first year of law school, we spent a whole semester learning how to do those things. So the introductory module is all about foundations. So how to read cases, how to be able to write persuasively, how to interview clients, how to deal cross-culturally, how to intake a new case, the basic skills that before were never really taught as part of an immigration program. And then, after this initial module, they're going to move on to studying in depth about family sponsorships, in depth about temporary visas, that kind of thing. But it's a rigorous program. And, the feedback from the students who are in the program right now is that, it's not a cakewalk, and it's completely an online program. So it's self-study. So all the resources are given to you, but really it's up to you to manage your time to make sure that you complete everything, because nobody's standing there looking over your shoulder, forcing you to do it, right?
Perhaps related to that, I see a question here from one of my students about what's the best way a recent graduate can gain experience, presumably in immigration law. I'm not sure what the requirements are for consultants with respect to internship hours post-graduate now. I'm not sure what they were. I think they had increased them, I believe, at some point, but what can you maybe share just generally then for either paralegal graduates or immigration consulting graduates or even law school graduates with respect to gaining experience? I mean, I think you're sharing about your experience you had at CLASP, I'm presuming, or at Osgood. But what else can they do to kind of make that transition from getting ready to be a practitioner from a student?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say at a very early stage, you need to first of all start networking with other people in the field in a non-threatening way, right? So like people in my position, for example, we get hit up for jobs nonstop, right? And it's only once in a while that we might actually be looking for someone. So you have a far better chance if you just ask for a coffee or like, a 15-minute Zoom chat, like, can I pick your brain? I just want to know a little bit more about what you do. That networking is really important because you can, first of all, get a lot of really good tips from people and you get different perspectives from different individuals, but also it keeps you top of mind. So, like, for example, when in immigration, it's kind of a weird field. Like you can't really plan that far ahead. Things tend to just sort of happen like they happen. So last week, I might have a full staff. And then this week, maybe somebody gives their notice, or all of a sudden I'm crazy busy and I need some, like, you need somebody now. So you're not thinking about it 6 months before. So when that opportunity comes up, you would like that person to remember you, right? Because you've kept in touch, you've showed a real interest. Maybe you've been willing to help them out too, right? So not only taking information from them, but you see an interesting article and you might forward it to them, say, hey, did you see this new program? This is really interesting, right? Like, it's a two-way street, developing relationships. And I would say, if you get any chance to volunteer somewhere, there's always so much work to do. We're always overloaded, but a lot of places can't afford to pay another person. At least they can't afford to pay somebody else in order to give them basic training, right? A lot of immigration places, some of them are working on a shoestring, right? Like their budgets are really small, depending what they're doing. So if you can show yourself valuable, particularly if you have connections within certain communities that you might be able to actually bring in work, that's a big thing. So they're thinking to themselves, okay, well, maybe I have to spend a little more time and a little more money to train this person. But if they're going to be able to refer clients into the firm, then I get some benefit out of it as well. So yeah, I think volunteer work definitely, it's not really possible right now because of COVID, but go to all those seminars, that are offered by all these different organizations, right? Like there's the immigration consultants one, there's the immigration lawyers one. Like, non-members can usually sign up for these things. And any sort of event that you can go to just sort of meet people and learn, a lot of seminars, online seminars, that kind of thing. That's all really good. I'm trying to think what else I might say. If you get a chance to do anything part-time, that's good too. Like, even if it's not a volunteer position, but, or being willing to start at a lower position, right? Like, I'll give you a good example. This has happened twice in our firm in the last 10 years, where somebody was really way overqualified, but applied for a position to be a receptionist. Right. And I was like, why in the world would you want to be a receptionist? That makes no sense. And they're like, no, I want to be in an office. Like, I want to be in the legal environment. Like, maybe I was a lawyer, like overseas or whatever, and I don't have any licensing here, but I just want to get my feet under me and I'll do this job. And then they were able to advance into better positions afterwards. So don't necessarily think to yourself, it has to be this kind of role. If you could just get your foot in, that's usually all you need. And then you show what you can do.
Now, related to that, I'm sure, like, as you said, you get a lot of people who approach you for maybe internships or jobs. What are some of the do's and don'ts I know you've touched on it a little bit there, but that you think would really help get someone's resume or someone into an interview with you or working for you?
A warm introduction always helps. Like, for example, if you have done your networking properly and, there's someone in that community that can make an introduction for you to the person who's hiring, that's always good. Like, for example, it's more meaningful to me if a colleague of mine sends me an email, says, you know what, I see you're hiring or whatever. Like, I met this person and they seem like they're really good. That I would definitely interview that person because they came recommended. I would say, obviously the basic stuff like professional presentation of the written material, that's important. Don't be afraid to follow up, like, not aggressively, but, like, law firms and consulting firms, like, they're really busy and they get a lot of email, right? So you might not get their attention the first time. Don't be afraid a few days later to follow it up and give them, I find it easier and I respond better to the person if I don't feel a lot of pressure, right? So, like, oh, hey, I'm sending you my resume, I'm looking for whatever, whether you're looking or not right now, maybe we could have a coffee or something, and, I can get some advice from you. And then I don't feel like I'm put on the spot, like this person is hitting me up for something. I can relax and kind of just get to know them. And I think also, circling back to something I said before, show how you could be useful to them. Okay. because you're looking for something. I mean, they may not even have a position, but if they see that you could be useful to them in some way, productivity or increasing profile in another ethnic community, or, even like referrals or whatever it is, show how you're going to add value. They might even consider making a position for you where there wasn't even one available.
I see another question here with respect to, I think we were talking about, or you were sharing about fees and block fees and hourly fees. Certainly what it's like to get from Osgood to where you are today, but maybe not necessarily all the clients understand that in terms of the amounts that it may cost them. How do you convince yourself, and especially I think this is more for newer practitioners, newer lawyers or consultants or paralegals, that you're not selling yourself short and that your fee is reasonable? How do you kind of have that dialogue to come up with an amount that certainly, as you mentioned, you don't want to be doing all of this work and in the end it's pretty much you're not making anything financially from it. So what advice do you have with respect to that?
Yeah. My way of thinking is I'd rather do one file for $5,000 than 5 files for $1,000 each, because at the end of the day, the benefit to me is the same, but it's less work. So I would say it's important to do a little bit of market research to find out what the range, what's the average range out there. Like, I have a general idea from my colleagues of my level of experience, approximately what they charge for certain things. So you'll know if you're really below or really above, and you try to, not be drastically under or over. You also have to think, like, what's it going to take for this to be worth it to you, right? Because we go into business for different reasons, right? Like, when I graduated from law school, it's not like I was after money, but at the same time, you do have to pay your bills. Okay, so you got to think to yourself, like, what do I need to make in order for this to be worth it to me? And then look at your pricing from that perspective. Okay, if I need to make, 5,000 a month or 10,000 a month, I don't know, like, whatever your expenses are, maybe they're low or maybe they're high. And then you say, okay, well, how many files do I need to do? And, what can I reasonably charge for those files? And stick to it, right? Because people, they like to get a Lamborghini for the price of a Toyota. And you need to really get good at explaining that to people. Like, you get what you pay for, right? If someone's offering you something really cheap, like, for example, if you saw a car for sale, if you saw like a BMW for sale and somebody was only asking $2,000, what's the first thing you would think? There's something wrong with it, right? And clients often have a weird reverse psychology around money, that they'll actually value your service more if you've charged them a good fee for it, right? Because, like, inexpensive to a lot of people means it's worthless. And you want to make sure that you're properly rewarded for your investment of time and expertise, right? It's interesting too, like, I've noticed this over the course of time, that people, and I think this is largely cultural as well, people fall into roughly 2 camps. There are people for whom time is money, and there are people for whom, like, products are money. So you will often meet a client who has absolutely no problem paying 10 grand for a Gucci purse, but does not want to pay you a couple $100 for a consultation where you're going to sit down with them for an hour. Like, it's a different mentality around time, and the value of time. So I would say, don't sell yourself short. Like, for me, I would rather have a person walk away and say, no, forget it, I'm going to go somewhere else, and, spend an hour with my family instead, as opposed to spend my time for free with somebody who already from the beginning is showing signs of not valuing you. And you will attract what you exude, right? If you don't feel like you're worth it, like the sharks swimming around, they smell blood in the water. If you're not confident that you're worth what the amount of money that you're asking, people will take advantage of you. So just understand that, once you've done your training, you put in your time, you've invested all this energy and money into your education, it's worth something after that. And do not be afraid to ask for what it's worth.
Perfect. Now, certainly over the last year, COVID-19 has played a big impact. We were talking about the Microsoft Teams virtual hearings. How else has that affected immigration, I guess, in general here to Canada? I mean, are we sort of still processing those applications in the same way? Or are people are unable to get on a plane now and in some cases actually come here after getting their visas or their permanent residency? What have you noticed from your clients over the almost last year now with respect to COVID and immigration?
Right. So across all lines of business, applications are still being accepted. They are ridiculously slow. Something that if it before it took a month, now you can easily budget 5 months, 6 months. So the main thing is delay. But you can still apply to sponsor people. People can still apply for work permits. You can still put in for express entry. You can still do all of those things. It's moving at a snail's pace. Immigration did not come anywhere near to meeting their targets for number of newcomers last year. Very doubtful whether they will meet them this year, maybe even next year. So the numbers overall are down, but the work has not decreased. So, because again, you're still allowed to file applications, just taking quite a lot longer. I mean, immigration really, really needs a technology upgrade. There's a very, I think their technology has been underinvested in for a long time. And it's showing, like the cracks are showing now. The amount of time it took them to get up to speed to working from home, like in the private sector, it'd be laughable. And like it is a big bureaucracy, right? And with a big bureaucracy, sometimes comes a bureaucratic mindset. But this is the way we've always done it. That's not a good reason to keep doing it that way, just because that's the way you've always done it, right? So I think like we are starting to see them get their feet under them a little bit. Stuff is starting to come through. Like, for example, a family class sponsorship for a spouse before COVID like from the minute you filed the application till they got their permanent resident visa would usually take about a year. Now we're getting acknowledgement of receipt after 11 months, 12 months, right? And then you start to see some activity, but that's crazy. That is a long delay. And it's hard for clients. It's hard for clients. And I had to be blunt with a guy today. I said, I'm going to be very brutally honest with you. The visa officer does not care that this is inconvenient for you. Okay, so just get rid of that preconceived notion right now. Like, if you're going to have to do a medical test, then you're going to have to do a medical test. Like you need to be very straight with clients. And they usually, most people will appreciate your honesty, even if it's something they don't want to hear, because then they know, right? You're not just blowing sunshine. Like you're not just telling them everything they want to hear and then not able to deliver. You're being straightforward with them. And even when that's not good news, people still do really appreciate it. So yeah, I think that COVID has just thrown everything off the rails, but the lines of business are all very much open.
I see a related question to that is how would you recommend for people looking to acquire new clients? Now, certainly branding and marketing, and there's an aspect to that. And what you just mentioned there, I think that's something certainly people should not be doing, right? Is that they promise everything to the client, they oversell and underdeliver, and you're just asking for some issues. So what can maybe you share about finding a way to attract new clients, and then what do you see the outlook with respect to business in the immigration field over the next 5 years, let's say?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you how I did it. So first of all, your number one best source of advertising is from referrals. If you do a good job, whoever that person was is going to send you 5 more people. You won't even have to work for it. So the file that's in front of you is the most important one. Do an excellent job, give good service, and that client is going to send you many more clients. And then those clients are going to send you more clients. That's how it develops organically. And you'll never have to spend $1 on advertising if you do it that way. When I was pretty young, I did a lot of getting out in the community and delivering things of value. So every church basement, every gurdwara, every community cultural event. I was always there. I would buy a ticket to it. I would support the fundraiser. If they wanted me to give a free seminar, I would give a free seminar. I still do a bit of that even up until now, like community centers or settlement agencies. They say, oh, would you come and give us like a free seminar about family sponsorships, general information? And I'll go and I'll give those talks. And then that's the way you get known amongst the different communities, right? And so that they remember you. And because you've given them something of value for nothing, it's an opportunity to not only give them something that they want so that they remember you, but also to showcase your expertise, right? When you're comfortable talking about something or delivering content, people can see that. They can see your confidence in terms of like when you're explaining something, suppose it has to do with residency obligation or whatever, like the criteria to get a visiting visa or something. You talk about it confidently. You give them, you want to give them enough information that it gives them something valuable, but at the same time, you don't want to give them all the information so they just run out and do everything by themselves. And then, like you obviously still want them to respect your expertise and to come to you when they want the work done. But I think, my opinion, advertising doesn't work. You may get different points of view on this, but I've gone through periods where I did a lot of advertising and spent thousands of dollars, and you tend to get what I call tire kickers, like people who, are just after you for free information. They're not seriously thinking about hiring you. And you just end up spending a lot of time answering useless inquiries from people who are not serious. An introduction or a referral is 100% the best kind of client. And a lot of the people that respond to ads are also super price sensitive, right? So if they're responding to an ad, they're probably calling 3 different people, and they're not looking at you in terms of like the quality of service that you can deliver, but they're going for the lowest price. That's not the kind of client that you want. Those people won't value your expertise particularly.
Now, in terms of, certainly there's paralegals, there's immigration consultants, there's lawyers, and what have you seen in terms of things or mistakes or outright obviously issues of competence perhaps, but that come across maybe on coming to you now after doing an appeal or just trying to fix the judicial review at federal court? What are some of the biggest errors that you've observed, and what should my students do to avoid putting themselves in those same situations?
Yeah, I would say they probably fall roughly into 2 areas. One would be people taking on files where they really don't know what they're doing, and for whatever reason, trying to do it anyway. Now, I'm not talking about like, everybody has to do something for the first time at least once, right? So there will be a time in your career as you start where you're taking a file and you're like, I've never done this before. But what separates the wheat from the chaff is the person who's going to say, okay, I'm going to do this, but they're going to seek mentorship. They're going to call somebody who does know what they're doing, figure it out. They're going to read all of the immigration policy guidelines, read all the case law, maybe get a textbook and read a chapter, make sure that before they actually execute, that they do know what they're doing, even if they're doing it for the first time. But you see a lot of shoddy work, like of people that, I've seen like immigration appeal division appeals where the person didn't even understand what the legal test was. They obviously didn't know the difference between contesting the legal validity of a removal order or legal validity of a decision versus arguing humanitarian and compassionate grounds. They didn't even understand the distinction. It's painful to see that. I'm of the view that I have no qualms about telling a client, you need to complain to the regulator. Right. And it's not that I'm after anybody. I would do the same thing if I saw that from a lawyer. I tell the client, like, you have a right to take action about this because it causes real damage to people. So I see that you see that sort of thing, shoddy work, incompetent, just not understanding what they're doing. You also see the other camp would be false promises or taking money and then not doing anything or not doing anything substantive. We worked on a file not long ago where the representative, basically had a hearing booked, put in a postponement request, didn't even wait for the answer, left away on vacation, and the postponement request was denied and the client was stuck. So, that kind of thing is just inexcusable. So yeah, I would say, never promise something that is not within your power to do. And that can be hard because clients sometimes they want you to tell them, yes, it's going to be approved. They want you to tell them that everything's going to be okay. And as much as you want to make them feel better, you really have to resist telling them, like, oh, the proper thing would be, I applied for a postponement, but it's not my power to say yes or no to that. The board member has to decide. So I don't know if they're going to approve it or not. That's the right thing to say, not, oh yeah, I applied for it. Don't worry about it. Yeah, everything's going to be fine. And then scarper off on vacation outside the country. So yeah, like really resist over promising things. In fact, if anything, under promise, and then your client will be pleasantly surprised if it does work out. And for sure, like developing relationships with senior people early in your career is really helpful. Like, for example, one of the things that we do a lot of at our firm is we offer advisory services to consultants and paralegals. So if they're like doing something for the first time, or they have a really complicated situation that they don't know how to figure out, they can book a paid appointment and like pay for half an hour of our time to just sit down with them and walk them through it, or point them to resources like, oh, have you seen this section of the website? Have you read this book? This is the main case. This is what you need to look at. So, like developing those relationships, even if you have to pay the person for their time, it's much better than making a mistake.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Chantal, for joining us here today. Actually, there's one substantive question I see about, certainly yesterday there was an inauguration of a new president in the United States, and maybe this will change. We were talking about my class last week, the Safe Third Country Agreement, and what it means when some people come to Canada, and I think it's Roxon Road there, and why is there why was that such a big deal versus just coming to a border crossing and
right.
Sort of making declare what maybe quickly kind of explain that. And
yeah, so the Safe Third Country Agreement, like basically what it means is that if a person arrives first in the US or first in Canada, the blanket rule is that they can't go to the other country and make the refugee claim there. They're supposed to make the refugee claim in the place where they've arrived. The problem, or maybe it's not a problem with the agreement, is that because of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, if someone sets their foot on Canadian soil, they've now got constitutional rights. And one of those rights is not to be sent to a situation where they could be exposed to a risk to their life, liberty, or security of person. So what that means is that legally, if someone was in that situation and came to the border and said to the border guard, I want to make a refugee claim, and there are lots of exceptions, by the way, I'm grossly generalizing it to save time. Someone comes to the border officer, says, I want to make a refugee claim. The border officer would say, no, you have to make it in the US, and would turn around and, sorry, someone's coming in just now. They would say that, you can't make the claim, and they would turn them back and not let them in. But if the person sneaked across the border and got to Canada and had their feet on Canadian soil, now constitutional rights, they would not be allowed to be sent back. They would have to be allowed to make the refugee claim here. So do I think a change of government on either side of the border is going to change that? Probably not, to be honest. It's a political hot potato because, for those of us who work in refugee advocacy, we're more in favor of like, okay, look, if this rule is making people sneak across the border, then just get rid of the rule. Just let them come to the border and make the claim and fingerprint them, and don't make them walk in -30 and lose their fingers and toes to frostbite in the middle of some farmer's field in Manitoba. Just get rid of it. But people on the more strict side of the spectrum, like people who are more authoritarian, would say, no, that's illegal. Like, you should be making your claim in the US. And if you sneak across the border, don't try to blame Canadian law. That's your problem, and you shouldn't be able to make your claim here. So that's the basic controversy. And because there are so many people on both sides, I think the easiest, like the path of least resistance for any government is just leave it the way it is. So I kind of think that administration change is not likely to change that particular aspect. I really doubt it.
Perfect. Thanks for answering that. And I think there's a litigation as well with respect to it that may provide some further guidance. I don't know if it's coming out next month or maybe later this year.
Because the federal court actually struck it down as being unconstitutional, and now it's going up to did it already go to federal court of appeal? I can't remember what stage it's at, but it's definitely under challenge from the government of Canada.
Perfect. So thank you so much for joining us here today and answering all our questions and giving a really excellent overview of immigration and the do's and don'ts and ethical considerations. And I think it's really important because we're at a time where certainly the immigration consulting program is changing and paralegals and their scope is something that's being dealt with as well. I understand with litigation and law society. So all it is that we need to make sure that people that are going to be practicing in this area, because so much is at stake, are competent and then they know. And I think listening to this, I think, in terms of continuing professional development, I think it would be great for students and those who are just newly licensed and in any area to gain some more knowledge there. So perhaps maybe Chantal, if you can end with any final words of for students and newly licensed practitioners, whether they be a consultant, a paralegal, or a lawyer, of how to navigate immigration law and any advice that you have from your many decades of experience in the field.
Yeah, I would say the one thing I would say is that immigration is 90% about sweat equity. Okay, you don't necessarily have to be a legal genius in order to do this work. I mean, there are times where you're doing a complicated litigation matter where it might make a difference, but most of it is just hard work. So you need to be the kind of person that cares. If you do not care about people or the results or trying to do your best, then this is not the field for you. Go and do something else, because the work is hard. The clients can be demanding, but at the end of the day, it's extremely rewarding as well. So if you don't have that fire in your gut to really want to help people and do your level best, you're gonna get tired and burn out really quickly, because if it doesn't really matter to you, it's just a lot of hard work for nothing, So I would say that really think about whether it suits your personality. If you're that kind of person that really wants to make a difference to those individuals, whether you have it in you, and if you do, it makes up for a lot. Really trying hard, it means you're going to spend that extra amount of time to find out the answer if you don't know the answer. It's not about being a genius or knowing everything. I don't know everything either. Like every day I have to look stuff up and things that I don't know. But the thing is, I do look it up. I don't just guess or think I'm just going to wing it. And that's, I think, what separates, incompetent people from competent people.
Perfect. Wish you all the best with your practice, and thanks again for joining us, and thanks for everyone for tuning in today. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chantal and JP. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.